I think that this is more of a question for Palestinian Americans, especially who are writing about Palestine and Palestinian Americans, how, these events might be affecting them and their work. But I think that things are different now, I think, than they were right after 9/11, where it was just like, you didn't feel like you had any allies. And now I think that there are people who are standing behind Arab American writers and artists,
Hi friends, this is Read and Write with Natasha podcast. My name is Natasha Tynes and I'm an author and a journalist. In this channel, I talk about the writing life, review books, and interview authors. Hope you enjoy the journey. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Read and Write with Natasha. I have with me today Eman Quotah, whose debut novel, Bride of the Sea, won the Arab American Book Award for Fiction in 2022. She grew up in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and Cleveland Heights, Ohio. When she's not writing fiction or essay, Eman is a communications consultant and a ghostwriter for nonprofit and business leaders. So, Eman, hi, nice to see you again. We're friends and neighbors, and I am funny how I read your novel before meeting you, and then I realized we were actually neighbors and in the same Boy Scouts troop. So that was kismet. It was meant to happen. So, Eman, thank you for joining us today, and congratulations on winning the award for the Bride of the Sea. So I enjoyed the Bride of the Sea a lot, being an Arab American myself. So, Eman, why don't you tell the audience what your novel is about?
Sure. The novel's about a family, Saudi and Saudi American family. The couple comes to the United States to study in the early 1970s, but then their marriage falls apart. And after they divorce, the husband returns to Saudi Arabia and the ex-wife stays in the United States. And then she disappears with their daughter. And so part of the novel is the father looking for his daughter. And then after they're reunited, it's the daughter sort of looking for family, looking for reconnection with that side of her. And somebody recently, I told them about it and they're like, that sounds kind of sad. And I think in some ways it is, but it's also, I think it has some moments of joy, especially around the family and the ways that family is connected to place and to our identities and who we are.
So my understanding, Eman, is that you're also you're half American, half Saudi, correct?
Right.
So, and you lived between both places from your bio. So I'm sure you get asked this all the time. I get this asked all the time, but any part of the story is inspired by real events?
So yes, not events in my own life. So the abduction part of the story was inspired by what happened to a family friend. His ex-wife, who was also Saudi, abducted their daughter, and he did not see her for many years. So the daughter was a child when she was taken away, and he didn't see her again until she was a young adult. And so I always knew about this story when I was growing up. And then when they were reunited, I remember my mom telling me about it. And I just started thinking about what would that be like to think that your father had left you, or was maybe she thought he was dead. I don't know the details of that because I haven't been in touch with the family. And what would that be like to be reunited with that person? And then over the years that it took to write the book, I started thinking about what would it be like to be the parent, both of the parents. And so that's how it turned into a book that is told from those three different perspectives, the child and the two parents. So that's inspired by a true story. It is not their story. Obviously, it's fictional. It's not my story. It's not based on my life. But there's a section of the book where the daughter goes to Saudi Arabia for the first time. She goes to Jeddah. And it wasn't until like the book was written and people were reading the book that I sort of started to realize that Hanadi, that's the character, or Hannah, she goes by two names in the book, that her relationship with her family was, and the family itself was in many ways kind of inspired by my own family and my own relationship with my family. And, I had lived in the United States. I was born in Jeddah, but I had lived in the United States from when I was small until I was about 8. And then we returned to Jeddah. And I lived there until I graduated from high school. And I sort of realized after the book was written that like me going there when I was 8 was kind of like the character going there when she's in her, early 20s. And of course, it's different to experience that when you're 8 versus when you're a young adult. But there were similarities that I think I drew from that experience, and just the experience of having a large family and the ways that large families interact with each other and are become sort of a kind of a microcosm of society, like there are conflicts and things like that. And, there are matriarchs and patriarchs. And so all of that is sort of drawn from things that I experienced or witnessed, but none of it is meant to be, it's fiction, you're a fiction writer. None of it is meant to be, my family. It's just a family that is inspired by the observations I made, over the years. And I think that sense of reunion with a place and with a family is something that some readers have really identified with, even if they weren't, most of us weren't abducted as children and kept away from the place. But even so, that experience of return and what that's like, and the experience of like being embraced by a family, even if they don't understand you and they don't understand the things that you've been through, is something that I think that a number of readers have really strongly identified with. You have your kids, I have my cat, who are helping us out this morning.
Keeping it real.
Yeah.
So, okay. So again, congrats on winning the Arab American Award. And for me, how was the novel perceived in Saudi Arabia? For many reasons, because, it deals with issues that maybe people can think of as a bit controversial, like the wife in the novel, if I remember correctly, changed her religion. She left her main religion and changed it, and I know that's a very controversial topic. And there are some other issues as well. And how was it received in Saudi Arabia?
I don't think it really has very widely been received there.
Okay.
So there's that. I think there have been people there, mostly like friends and family, who have been able to get a hold of the book through Amazon, but the English version was not released there. So, but thanks to Amazon's worldwide tentacles, people were able to get the American edition of the book there. The book was also published in Arabic in Lebanon. And I understand that it has been distributed in Saudi bookstores, but I don't actually know, what the sales were there or anything. So I don't know, if people read it and how it was received, if they did read it. What I do know is that I had an interview with another Saudi American writer who writes for the Arab News, which is a big newspaper in Saudi Arabia, English language newspaper. So it has been talked about there. And, I personally think that I understand the view that these some of the topics are controversial, but to me, I'm simply writing about things that could and sometimes do happen. And so, yeah, there hasn't been a huge controversy around it, but I think part of that is because it hasn't been widely read over there.
So I want to ask you about the Arabic version. How did that happen? Did you translate it? Did you hire a translator yourself? Like, I want to understand the mechanism. For anyone who's watching or listening, it'll be good for them to know how you do that in a different language.
Yeah. So my agent works with a co-agent who works on selling the book to overseas territories. So we've sold it so far in Lebanon, in Italy and Turkey. The Italian and Arabic versions are out. The Turkish version is, I think, still in the works. And so with the Arabic one, they hired the translator. I told my agent at the time that I wanted to at least be able to review the translation. And he was like, "Are you sure? That's going to be a lot of work." But I really wanted to do it because it's, there's a difference between Lebanese dialect and Hijazi dialect, which is what my characters speak. So it was important to me to make sure that especially the dialogue and some of the words that are used in the narrative were translated correctly. So actually, my dad and I both reviewed the book, the translation, and made some corrections. And it was like a lot of work, which I offloaded onto my father, which was nice. I just went through and just checked if I agreed with him. But it was really, I found it to be really wonderful to be able to do it because I think it's really important to preserve the uniqueness of the different dialects and the different cultures within Arab culture. And, Saudi and sub-Saudi dialects like Hijazi are less well-known, than say Lebanese dialect or Egyptian dialect or other dialects that through popular culture, more Arabs hear. So it was really important to me and to my dad, which I thought was cool that we could share that together to share that our specific dialect in the book. So that's how that came about.
I like that.
Yeah, I don't know too much about the distribution of the book since then. That is sort of something that writers or authors are not too much privy to, until you get a royalty statement, which I haven't yet for that book or for that version of the book.
So, okay. I want to talk a bit about your publishing journey, right? So I talked to a lot of authors here, and for you, it's your debut novel, and you already secured an agent, which is a big deal in the publishing world, as you know. And I talked to a lot of authors here who try for years, and they couldn't find an agent, and so many of them ended up with either self-publishing or with hybrid presses. So how did you do it? What's your superpower?
Oh, wow. Well, it's kind of a meandering journey. So my first manuscript was not this book, Bride of the Sea. It was a different book. And I did manage to get an agent with that book. So that was in 2012. And my book came out in 2021. So you can see that there was a big gap there. And at the time, there was less, I think, of a clamoring for other voices and own voices. And I did find an agent, but it took a lot of querying. And I had one offer. People are like, "Here's how you decide which offer to take." And it was like, I have one, so I will take it, and my agent was specifically interested in stories about the Middle East because he spent part of his childhood in Israel. And so I was lucky to find someone who valued writing about that part of the world and valued writing by people from those places. So we tried to sell that book for many years, and it went through a number of different iterations. I had conceived of it as an adult novel, but because some of the protagonists are children, then, we rewrote it so that we could pitch it as like a YA or middle grade novel. And it has gone through a number of big revisions. Meanwhile, I started writing or went back to writing Bride of the Sea. I had sort of done some early pages before that manuscript that got me the agent, but I had really not known how to write the book. And then once I had written that first novel, so maybe I needed to get like a novel out of my system before I could write this one. I started working on this one again. And, I have kids. I had a day job. And so it took time. I knew it would take me time. And then it took about 5 years to write. And then when we started submitting it, so my agent, lucky for me, stuck with me through that time of not selling the book. And he was kind of waiting for me to finish this one. And then we went through some, a lot of rejections when we sent this book out. And I ended up rewriting it a couple of times. And finally, we landed an amazing press. Tin House is an amazing press. Maisie Cochran is an amazing editor. So at that point, there were moments when I was like, I'm never going to be a published author. But when Bride of the Sea came out and I had the opportunity to work with a really great independent press and a really great editor, it seemed worth it. So that's the journey there. I feel like so many writers have stories like that, that are when you see the book, it seems like it must have been sort of a straight line journey, but most of us have journeys that go up and down and around, that's pretty normal. It doesn't feel great while you're going through it. But it's pretty normal. It's sort of the way things happen. I wish it wasn't necessarily like that. But I do think that now there's a lot more ways to get published. There's a lot more interest in different kinds of voices. And there's still some difficulty around like what kinds of stories do they want from people who are immigrants or children of immigrants or people with complicated backgrounds, but I think there's more editors and agents who themselves are people of color or come from Southwest Asian, North African backgrounds. There's still not a lot, but there's more Muslim agents and editors than there used to be. Still not a lot, but more than zero, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's just the past couple of years that I have in both book and short story or essay publishing have encountered and been able to work with editors who come from who have Muslim heritage or Arab heritage. Like before that, I never encountered people like that reading my work and responding to my work. And it's not that, say a white editor or agent can't understand and value our work, but it does seem to me that when you're working with someone who comes from sort of a shared or similar heritage, there's a certain level of understanding that you start with, that you already have, and you don't have to explain or get to that understanding. So I think it's so important, the changes that are happening in publishing are so important. And I hope that they continue so that more of us can have easier journeys, and not, 12-year marathons.
So your agent, you found it just by querying, like,
That's right.
just a shot in the dark. Yeah,
That's right.
You just kept querying. So it was not like
querying.
Someone introduced you. Yeah. Okay. Wow. So, okay. So now, let's say, Palestinian and Arab issues are in the forefront of the news. Being an Arab American author yourself, how would the current conflict, well, it's not really a new conflict, but, now it's more in the news, affect your book sales, or if it hasn't? Or, are you getting more invitation, less invitations? What's your situation now with what's happening?
Yeah. I don't think it's affected me like in those outward ways. Like, for example, this fall, I already had set up it just happened that I had set up a number of things where I was interacting with other Arab American authors. So I did a book launch for Ghassan Zainuddin's new story collection, where I was in conversation with him at Politics and Prose here in DC recently. That was earlier this month. And then last week I was in Minneapolis for an Arab American writers writing conference. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to Detroit for the Arab American Book Awards, where I'm going to be there as a judge. I was a judge for this year's fiction contest. And the events that are happening in Israel and Gaza and Palestine have just changed the tenor of those events. They haven't necessarily changed everything that we talk about, but they have made them different. You know, when Ghassan and I sat down to talk, we were both feeling very sort of somber. And he started by reading a poem by Naomi Shihab Nye. But I think through the conversation, it felt good and it felt energizing to be able to talk about a book about Arab American lives during this time when there's so much stereotypes and vitriol and we're feeling, you know, similarly to the Jewish community, we're feeling kind of under attack, right? And it's good to sort of share that grief and that feeling of fear with each other, but then also to be able to turn to our art, which nurtures us and energizes us over the years, you know, that we are working on them and when we're sharing them with people. And at the Arab American conference, the Rawi Mizna conference last week in Minneapolis, there was so much. There was this, you would go from like moments of deep grief that people were sharing together and moments of like pure joy that we are together and that we are sharing our art with people who we don't have to explain our art to, who get it, you know? So I think that's the way the tenor has changed. And there's also a little bit of, you know, we had security there. There's a little bit of fear. But in terms of like book sales and things like that, that hasn't happened. I don't think that it has had an effect. I know, like, for example, the author Itaf Room, who is the author of A Woman is New Man, and her new book is Evil Eye. She's a Palestinian
Evil Eye,
author.
yeah.
Yeah, it just came out. And she, you know, she posted on Instagram, standing with Palestine. She's Palestinian American. She writes about Palestinian Americans. And now she's getting videos from people who are throwing her books away.
Oh.
Because she said, I stand with Palestine. And so, and they're like, I loved your books, but I don't anymore. And it's like, what did you think you were reading? You know, you were reading a book by a Palestinian. Like, what did you think this
about
was?
Palestinians?
Yeah, you were reading about Palestinians. Yeah. What did you expect her to say? And how did you expect her to respond to this? You know? So I don't know how, I think that this is more of a question for Palestinian Americans, especially who are writing about Palestine and Palestinian Americans, how, you know, these events might be affecting them and their work. But I think that things are different now, I think, than they were right after 9/11, where it was just like, you know, you didn't feel like you had any allies. And now I think that there are people who are standing behind Arab American writers and artists, you know?
Interesting, because I was not here during 9/11. I was actually in London. And so you were here during 9/11 and you see the shift. So that's good to know.
Yeah. I mean, I think it feels similar to that in terms of how vitriolic the conversation is, but different at the same time, in the sense that I think that some of the people who are saying, you know, who are speaking out against Islamophobia, at the same time they're speaking out against anti-Semitism are really mean it, you know? Like, whereas I think I felt like back after 9/11, even, you know, George Bush was saying, you know, he was standing against violence against Arab Americans at the same time that he was doing all the policies that he did that resulted in great violence and discrimination against our communities here and overseas. So I think that is a difference. But still, there's still lip service. I'm not saying there isn't. I think there is for sure. But I think there are more people who are doing more than give lip service and who really see us than there were back then, for sure.
So I want to shift gears a bit and talk about life as an author.
Ooh.
So you mentioned that you
My
had
favorite topic.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to talk about, but we don't have much time.
Yeah.
But so I want to talk about life as an author. So you mentioned you had a day job when you were writing. Do you still have your day job?
I'm a consultant now, so that gives me more flexibility in time.
So you're not a full-time author per se, or would you consider yourself a full-time author? The reason
it's like it feels like
or is it in between?
Yeah, it feels like a trick question in a way. I'm not saying you're trying to trick me, but like
I am.
I've had this conversation with a friend of mine who, and I think there was an article out recently. I forget by the person who wrote it, but it's sort of like, is creative writing, like, is it work or is it play? What is it? Do I consider that part of my work? Do I consider it work?
Well, ask Stephen King.
Right. For him, it's work. Right. He's getting paid. When I'm getting paid for it, is it work? But when I'm not getting paid for it, and when I'm getting paid for it, not very much, is it work? But I guess, no, I'm not a full-time author in that I don't spend 8 hours of my day working on my writing business. But I think, so I'm a consultant. I would say if you looked at my income, and this is not looking at my time, but looking at my income, like if you looked at my income, I would say that probably 80% of it is communications consulting related. And maybe 20% of it is a combination of books, honoraria, teaching, and other things that are related to being a creative writer. But it's not just the books, it's a combination of things. And if you looked at my time, I'm not exactly sure how it would come out. It kind of depends on the month and that kind of thing, how much of my time is on creative work versus work that brings in the bigger amount of money, which is the consulting stuff. And some of my creative stuff is volunteer, like it's like judging a contest as a volunteer, working on the past couple of months I've been working on a literary magazine as a volunteer, or maybe it's, writing an article where I get, a small fee. So it feels like kind of volunteer, but not really. So, and those things kind of come in and out. But one of the things that I wanted in working for myself was to have more flexibility to be able to do the things where I am advancing the literary community and my own creative work, in addition to being able to have more time to focus on writing books, but also to be able to do things like write essays or reviews or work on a magazine or judge a contest, things like that, I couldn't do while I had a 9-to-5, but it was always pulling away time from the writing if you did that. And now it's like, it's not pulling time away from my writing to do that. It's just kind of fitting things in. So I like that flexibility a lot. But what it means is, and maybe you experience this too, is that there's sometimes a feeling of instability and like sort of not knowing what's coming next.
Yeah.
So yeah. I deal with that by like, it's the first day of a new month. So yesterday I do like sort of quarterly planning or quarterly kind of what's coming up for me. And I have a little a Post-it that's about this big, and I divide it into quarters, and I write, 4 months, this month and the next 3 months, all the things that I'm working on, in terms of, fiction, projects, fiction I'm working on, client projects I'm working on, volunteer projects I'm working on, and I put them on there so I can see and plan ahead. Oh, I can do take on another project that month or take on another couple of projects that month. And that's how I keep myself from going a little crazy because I don't know what's happening. So I've been doing this for 2 years after years and years of having 9-to-5 jobs and learning how to write around a 9-to-5 job, which meant, writing on the way to work on the metro, on my phone, or writing in the evening when I got home after the kids were in bed. But now I can fit it into my, day. And that's been a really nice thing. I know, not everybody can do it, but for me, I've gotten to the point in my career where I think that my consulting work can pay for the time that I need for the other stuff. And that's how I look at it. I work to write.
Like you say, like I exercise to eat candy or whatever.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So would you ever go back to 9-to-5?
Maybe. I don't know. Like maybe if I need if I'm sort of, when my kids are older, maybe, or maybe before that, I don't know. I'm not opposed to going back to it because I don't think it's impossible to keep being an author while also having a 9-to-5. It's not easy, but it's not impossible. And I feel like, I don't know, I think maybe this happens for a lot of people who write creatively or are authors, is like, you feel like you have to basically build 2 careers, right? Mm-hmm. You're building your career as a whatever the 9-to-5 or teaching job or whatever is. And you're also trying to build your career as a creative writer. And you get to a certain point where early on, it's like, what I really want is just to be an author 9-to-5. And honestly, if someone handed that to me, I wouldn't say no necessarily. But but you also, I feel like I got to a point where I had built a communications career. And I didn't necessarily want to fully let go of it. I like what I do there. I like working with, people who are leading justice-oriented nonprofits or nonprofits that are doing good things in the world. I like, ghostwriting for people who have something important to say and who other people are going to listen to. I enjoy it. It's, and so I think that if I had an opportunity to find, it would have to be the right 9-to-5, the right benefits, and that kind of thing. But I wouldn't be opposed to it necessarily. But I don't know. And I'm like, I'm kind of like, it's okay not to know and to enjoy what you're doing right now, live in the moment a little bit. One of the things I enjoy about working for myself is viewing that as a business and strategizing for myself and planning ahead and kind of really embracing that business aspect of it. And the writing stuff fits into that too, because writing is a creative activity, but it's also a business. And if you want to be traditionally published, or if you want to be self-published and sell your books, you have to think of it as a business. And that can be kind of jarring sometimes, because what you really want to do. But you have to think of it that way. So I'm thinking about things I took on the guest editing gig because I had been thinking for a while that, maybe I'd like to try editing. I've edited people's work, but in my jobs, I haven't edited fiction before. And so I thought it'd be fun to try it out. And that's adding something to my creative resume, So, that's adding something to my resume as a business of me. And it's been fun. I really loved, I had the honor to edit something by Mayan Nakib, who's a lady author who I really admire, and Sarah Cipher, who's an Arab American writer.
What's the magazine?
It's called Ruwayat, and our
Ruwayat. Okay.
And our new issue has been rolling out since mid-October. It'll finish rolling out in mid-November.
I'll check it out.
Yeah. And so I've been working with two other co-fiction editors. And so that's also been fun learning from them. And so I think that there are so many ways to be involved in the writing community outside of just doing your own writing. And I think when I had a 9-to-5 and I had kids and I had all the family obligations and I was trying to write a novel, like I couldn't, it was hard to consider doing anything else, like I said, it would take away from the writing time. But I see a lot of people who are trying to do it all, who are like, they're editing magazines, they're writing their own stuff, they're going to school, they're, it's whatever sustains you and you can pull into your life to help be connected to a community of writers, I think is really great. I feel like I'm making up for lost time when I was just sort of like a novelist in her hole, and I've really enjoyed that.
How do clients find you? How do clients find you?
For my communications work?
Yeah.
Yeah. They find me through word of mouth pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, or referrals to people I already know, because I've worked, for so long. I knew a lot of people at different organizations. And so that's how it's come about. Yeah. And so I sort of I try to post things on LinkedIn from time to time.
Yeah.
To sort of show people, to do kind of two things. One, show people how I think about the work. So sometimes I'll do posts about, kind of communications related things, but also just so that people remember that I exist. And a couple of times I've had people say, "Oh, I called you about that after I saw you post about this totally unrelated thing," And so I think just kind of one of the things for me about finding clients is there are a lot of people I know who could have a need for what I do. So making sure they know what I do, understand what I do, and remember that I exist so that when they have a need for me, they'll reach out. That's sort of my way of trying to market, basically.
Yeah. Okay. So your novel came out when? In 2021?
That's right.
Okay. What are you working on now? If you are working on something new.
Yeah.
I wanna and what's in the pipeline for you as an author?
Yeah. So after a few months after Bride of the Sea came out, I started working on my Arab American Hollywood novel, which I'm still working on.
What's the Arab American? Is that a love story? Is it a love story?
It's based on the life of Omar al-Sharif.
Okay.
And the first chapter is coming out in the upcoming cinema issue of the magazine Mizna, but I'm still working on the rest of it. So there's that. And that's been super fun. But then this year, I have been working with a UK publisher on the sort of folklore inspired horror book for them. And so that is that's the thing that I'm really working on right now.
They contacted you to write for them, or how did that work?
That's right. I'm doing sort of a work for hire kind of thing.
That's fun. And how did they find you?
I am not sure. Somebody had read my book.
Yeah. Fun. So the reason I get into the weeds is just to help other authors as well who are listening. How do they get into the scene and how, so before we conclude, what kind of tips or messages would you give to aspiring authors and also to, let's say, Arab American authors or immigrant authors or authors of color who want to make it, in this crowded market?
Yeah. I mean, that's a really important point. It's really crowded.
How do you stand out?
Yeah. I mean, and even when you do stand, people will see you stand, even if you get reviewed and things, it doesn't necessarily translate to sales,
No, it doesn't. No.
And there's so many, I think, there's so many things that we don't really know, or there's so many ways in which publishing is kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Not transparent.
Yeah.
That
Ambiguous.
yeah, or just that, like, people don't talk about stuff all the time, and so you just don't know. Like, I mean, I think people like think that you have to know someone to get in. It's like, no, cold querying actually works. Some of the biggest writers, got their agents through cold querying. Is it helpful to, have someone refer you to an agent or something? Sure, might be, but it doesn't mean they'll take you. Like, it might mean that they're more likely to read your work. I also, Ghassan Zainuddin, who I was in conversation with this last month, he didn't have an agent when he sold his book to Tin House, and an editor there read one of his stories and reached out to him, and that happens. And
I'm listening to his book now. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's so good. Yeah,
it's amazing. It's very good. Yeah,
it's hilarious too. I love the humor in it. So that was his story. So I guess, okay. So the thing that I got told early in my career that I didn't really listen to was, I was writing what were the earliest pages of Bride of the Sea that ended up being cut eventually. But, the earliest moment when I was like working on it, or one of the early moments, and I was in a writing class, and my instructor, who, he was like, okay, you got started. Now keep going. Now you got to finish it. And I was like, and then, it took me years to do that. I think that a lot of times, many of us, not all of us, some people have this amazing ability to, in their 20s or in their teens, sit down and write the whole thing. And I'm talking specifically to long form writers now.
Yeah.
But a lot of us, we want to have written before we've written, right? And we're dreaming about all the things that will happen when the book is done, instead of sitting down and just writing the book. And so that's my advice, is to figure out how you're going to do it, because it's not just going to happen by itself. The only difference between someone who wants to write a novel and someone who has written a novel is that one of them wrote the novel, right? So it's a matter of, and sometimes you don't know how to do it. There are books, there are classes, there are people to talk to. There are, folks on social media who are talking about how they did it. I think, like, just don't think that you have to reinvent the wheel too. There are ways to get through the process of writing a long form work. That might be, for some people, that's goal setting. For some people, that's going to a retreat or something, so you can get a whole bunch of pages written. Like, there's ways to do it. You don't have to make up the technical solution on your own. You can talk to people and figure out how they did it. And I wouldn't listen to just one person, because different people have different ways of doing it. But I think there are like 2 or 3, to me, in the way I have taught about this. I'm teaching a class about this in December for writer.com about how to get started writing a novel. And I have identified like a handful of ways that authors get from start to finish. So there aren't a million ways to do it. There are a couple of ways to do it. There are a million ways to do it when you think about, each of us is going to tailor the method of writing the book to who we are and how we work best. But it's really important to try to get to the end. And I think a lot of times that's the part that seems so hard to do. But if you remember that many people have done it and you can do it too, I think that's another way. That was like 10 pieces of advice. How many pieces of advice did I just give Natasha?
That's great. So Eman, how do people reach you, and how do they get your books, or they want to take your courses? What is the best way to reach you?
Sure. I'm on Instagram. I think that might be the best way, or LinkedIn. If you are interested in talking about day jobs, or giving me work. If you want to buy my book, you can get it from online booksellers, maybe your local bookstore you can order from. And you can also reach me through my website. There's a contact form there, emanquotah.com. Yeah, I love hearing from aspiring writers. And I love hearing from people who have read my book and are interested in telling me how it affected them. So
that's great. So, Eman, best of luck. And
thank you.
I know you're very busy, and thank you for taking the time to chat with me. And for anyone who's listening or watching, thank you for joining us for another episode of Read and Write with Natasha. And until we meet again.
Thank you for having me, Natasha.
Thank you for tuning in to Read and Write with Natasha. I'm your host, Natasha Tynes. If today's episode inspired you in any way, please take the time to review the podcast. Remember to subscribe and share this podcast with fellow book lovers. Until next time, happy reading, happy writing.